The call came on a Tuesday morning in April, just as dawn broke over Fort Cavazos. I was finishing my pre-dawn run, sweat cooling on my skin in the gentle spring breeze, when my phone vibrated against my arm. Dad was gone. Heart attack, they said. Quick and unexpected. I remember standing frozen on the track, watching other soldiers continue their morning routines while my world tilted on its axis. My father, retired Sergeant Major James Ramirez, was my North Star, my foundation. A man who had raised me alone after my mother died, who had taught me the meaning of service and integrity, who had supported my decision to follow in his footsteps, even when it meant long deployments and missed holidays. "I'm sorry for your loss, Major Ramirez," said Captain Hayes, my immediate superior, 3 days later when I returned to duty. "Your father was a legend in these parts." I nodded, throat tight. "Thank you, sir." What I couldn't say was how empty my apartment felt, how I kept reaching for my phone to call him with news about my day, how I'd wake up thinking he was still alive only to remember all over again. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received notice from Dad's lawyer. He'd left me everything. Most importantly, the villa at Canyon Lake. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. A modest 3-bedroom home with a wraparound porch overlooking the water, built with his retirement funds and his own 2 hands. "Your father wanted you to have a place to come home to," Mr. Galloway, the lawyer, told me, passing over a set of keys that felt unnaturally heavy in my palm. He was very specific about that. I visited the villa for the first time on a Saturday in late May. The property needed work. Weeds had overtaken the garden, dust had settled on every surface inside, and one of the porch railings had begun to rot. But it was mine. Ours. A physical manifestation of my father's love. I spent the day cleaning, my uniform exchanged for jeans and a faded army t-shirt. I opened windows to let in fresh air, swept floors, and sorted through Dad's belongings. In his study, I found photo albums filled with pictures of us. Dad teaching me to fish off the dock, Dad in his dress uniform at my academy graduation, Dad and me sharing beers on the porch after my first deployment. On the desk sat a framed picture I'd never seen before. Dad standing next to a much younger General Harrington in desert fatigues, arms slung around each other's shoulders, wide grins on their dirt-streaked faces. I picked it up, tracing my father's smile with my fingertip. "I'll take care of it, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "I promise." That evening, I sat on the dock with a beer, watching the sunset over Canyon Lake. For the first time since his death, I felt my father's presence, not as an absence, but as something that surrounded me. This place was his heart made manifest, and now it was mine to protect. I returned to Fort Cavazos the next day, already planning weekend projects to restore the villa to its former glory. But I'd barely settled back into my quarters when my phone rang. "Major Ramirez," said the voice of Sergeant David Collins, my most, trusted NCO. "You need to get to the command center ASAP. Colonel Whitmore's looking for you." I frowned. "Did he say why?" "No, ma'am, but he doesn't look happy." Colonel Stephen Whitmore had taken command of our unit 6 months earlier, replacing a well-respected officer who'd retired after 20 years of service. Whitmore had a reputation for being ambitious, demanding, and meticulous about appearances. He'd made it clear from his first day that he expected nothing short of perfection, particularly from his officers. I hurried to the command center, straightening my uniform as I walked. The colonel was waiting in his office, standing at the window with his hands clasped behind his back. "Major Ramirez," he said without turning, "I understand you were at Canyon Lake yesterday." I blinked, surprised. "Yes, sir. I was at my father's property." "Your father's property?" He turned then, fixing me with a cold stare. "Are you certain of that?" "Sir? I've been reviewing some paperwork." He gestured to his desk, where a folder lay open. "It seems there may be some question about the ownership of that particular piece of real estate. With all due respect, sir, there's no question. I have the deed and the will. The villa belongs to me." Something flashed in his eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or something darker. "Major, are you aware that your father received a land grant from the military as part of an experimental housing program in the 1990s? I frowned. "No, sir. My father purchased that land outright after his retirement." "That's not what these documents indicate." He tapped the folder. "According to these records, the land was provided with the understanding that it would revert to military control upon his death." My heart began to pound. "Sir, that can't be right. I have documentation." "Documentation can be forged, Major." His voice was silky, dangerous. Or perhaps your father simply didn't inform you of the arrangement. My father wouldn't. I'm going to need you to surrender any keys or access codes to the property pending a full investigation, he cut in. This is a matter of military resources, and I expect your full cooperation. I stood there, stunned into silence. The colonel was lying. I knew it with absolute certainty. But he outranked me, and direct insubordination would only make things worse. May I see the documents you're referring to, sir? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. That won't be necessary at this stage. He closed the folder deliberately. I expect the keys on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. Dismissed. I saluted mechanically, mind racing. As I turned to leave, he added, And Major, I'd advise you to keep this matter to yourself. We wouldn't want rumors compromising the integrity of our unit, would we? That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my quarters, replaying the conversation, trying to understand Whitmore's angle. The villa wasn't particularly valuable, and it certainly wasn't strategically important to the military. So why was he lying? Why was he so determined to take it from me? I pulled out my father's papers, the deed, the property tax statements, the will, and spread them across my bed. Everything was in order. There was no mention of any military program or reversion clause. My father had bought that land fair and square, had built that house with his own savings and sweat equity. But Colonel Whitmore was my commanding officer. His word carried weight, and directly challenging him would be career suicide. I needed to be smart about this. In the darkness of my quarters, I made a decision. I would appear to comply, for now. I would make a copy of the keys, hand over the originals, and bide my time. I would find out what game Whitmore was playing, and I would beat him at it. For my father. For the legacy he had left me. For the home he had built with love and sacrifice. I just needed to figure out how. The following weekend, I drove back to Canyon Lake. I'd handed over the keys as ordered, but not before making copies. I told myself I was just going to check on the property, make sure it was being maintained, that no one had broken in. I wasn't technically disobeying orders, I wasn't planning to enter the house. But as I rounded the final curve in the road, my heart stopped. There, parked in my father's driveway, was Colonel Whitmore's distinctive black SUV alongside several other military vehicles. I pulled over, cutting my engine, and sat frozen behind the wheel. What was he doing there? I grabbed my binoculars from the glove compartment and trained them on the villa. Through the lenses, I could see Whitmore standing on the front porch, gesturing broadly as he spoke to a group of officers I didn't recognize. They were laughing, drinking beers, making themselves at home in my father's space. White-hot anger surged through me. This wasn't about military property. This was personal. Whitmore had lied to steal my father's home for his own use. I was about to start my car, to confront him, consequences be damned, when my phone rang. I looked down to see Sergeant Collins's name on the screen. Ma'am, he said when I answered, his voice tight with urgency. Where are you? Near the lake, I replied vaguely. Why? Don't go to the villa. Whitmore's there with the brass from division headquarters. He's telling everyone it's a newly acquired military retreat facility. My fingers tightened around the phone. He's lying, David. That's my property. I know, ma'am. A pause. Look, he's been building this narrative for weeks. He told the general that he negotiated the acquisition himself, said it would be perfect for officer training retreats and VIP visits. The general? My stomach dropped. General Harrington believes him? I don't know what the general believes, but Whitmore's putting on quite a show. You can't just barge in there. You'll look unhinged, and he'll use it against you. I watched through the binoculars as Whitmore led his guests inside my father's house. My house. What am I supposed to do then? Let him take it? No, ma'am. Colin's voice was firm. But we need to be strategic. Whitmore's connected. He's got friends in high places. We need evidence, and we need to approach this through proper channels. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rage coursing through my veins. You're right. Thank you, Sergeant. Anytime, ma'am. And for what it's worth, your father was good to me when I was just a rookie. Whatever you need to make this right, I'm with you. I ended the call and sat watching the villa for another hour, documenting who came and went, taking photos with my phone. When the gathering finally dispersed, I waited until Whitmore's SUV disappeared around the bend before approaching the house. The door was locked, but I had my copy of the key. I hesitated, knowing that entering could be construed as disobeying a direct order, but I needed to see what they had done. Inside, the villa was transformed. My father's worn, comfortable furniture had been replaced with sleek modern pieces. His fishing gear was gone from the hooks by the door, his books removed from the shelves, his photographs absent from the walls. It was as if someone had erased every trace of James Ramirez from the home he had built. In the study, Whitmore had installed an ornate desk, where my father's simple oak one had stood. A new painting hung on the wall, an expensive-looking landscape that clashed with the room's character. On the desk sat a framed photograph of Whitmore shaking hands with a senator, both men smiling broadly for the camera. I felt violated, gutted, as if Whitmore had desecrated my father's grave. I sank into the desk chair, fighting back tears of frustration and grief. That's when I noticed the drawer wasn't fully closed. I pulled it open and found a folder labeled Canyon Lake Property. Inside were documents, altered deeds, backdated letters, fabricated land, grant paperwork, all creating a false history of the villa as military property. Whitmore had been thorough in constructing his lie. I took pictures of everything, careful to leave the documents exactly as I'd found them. Then I searched the rest of the house, documenting changes, looking for any additional evidence of Whitmore's deception. In my father's bedroom, now converted to a guest room, I found something that made my blood run cold. On the nightstand was a draft of a memo to General Harrington, outlining plans to use the newly acquired retreat facility for a special training event next month. The entire unit would be there, along with senior leadership from Fort Cavazos and several Pentagon officials. It was an elaborate show designed to cement Whitmore's lie and advance his career. He was using my father's home to curry favor with his superiors, to position himself for promotion. I was so focused on the document that I almost missed the sound of tires on gravel outside. Headlights swept across the wall as a vehicle pulled into the driveway. Someone was here. I quickly replaced the memo, checked that everything was as I'd found it, and slipped out the back door. I crept around the side of the house just as Colonel Whitmore emerged from his SUV, accompanied by a woman in civilian clothes. "You'll love it," he was saying, his arm around her waist. "Best view on the lake. I've been eyeing this place for years." "It's certainly remote," she replied, leaning into him. "Perfect for a private getaway." I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering in my chest. Not only was Whitmore stealing my property for professional gain, but he was also using it for personal pleasure, bringing dates to the home my father had built, acting as if it were his own. I waited until they were inside before making my escape, moving silently through the darkness to where I'd parked my car down the road. As I drove back to Fort Cavazos that night, my mind raced with possibilities and plans. I now had evidence of Whitmore's deception, but would it be enough? He outranked me. He had connections. He'd been careful to create a paper trail that supported his claims, false though they were. I needed help. Someone with authority who would listen, who would see through Whitmore's lies. But who? The answer came to me as I recalled the photograph I'd found in my father's study. Dad and a young General Harrington, arms around each other, friends forged in combat. The general had known my father, had served with him. If anyone would listen to me, it would be him. But approaching the general directly would be tricky. Whitmore would see it as an end run around the chain of command, and if he caught wind of my plan before I had a chance to present my case, he could paint me as insubordinate, unstable, unable to accept my father's death. I needed more than just the evidence I'd gathered. I needed a perfect, irrefutable case, and I needed allies. As I pulled into my parking spot at the base, I made my decision. I would build my case carefully, gather every scrap of evidence, and when the time was right, I would take it all to General Harrington. I would fight for my father's legacy with the same determination and strategic thinking he had taught me. Colonel Whitmore might have rank and connections, but I had something stronger, the truth, and I would make sure it came to light no matter what it cost me. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that had been absent since my father's death. I had a mission now: reclaim his legacy from a man who had no right to it. But I needed to be methodical, thorough. One mistake could cost me everything. My first stop was the Fort Cavazos legal office. Captain Maria Diaz, the assistant staff judge advocate, had worked with my father years ago and had always treated me with respect. "Major Ramirez," she said, gesturing me into her office. "What brings you to legal today?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm seeking clarification on property rights, specifically property passed down from a veteran to their next of kin." She studied me for a moment. "Is this about your father's place at Canyon Lake? You've heard something?" I tensed, wondering how far Whitmore's narrative had spread. "Just rumors." She lowered her voice. Some officers were talking about a new military retreat facility out there. I thought it seemed coincidental given your father's recent passing. I glanced at her door, ensuring it was closed. Captain Diaz, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the situation, the inheritance, Whitmore's false claims, what I'd discovered at the villa. I kept my voice steady, presenting the facts as clearly as I would in an operational briefing. When I finished, Diaz leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. That's a serious accusation, Major. I know. That's why I need to understand the legal grounds. If the property was indeed my father's, transferred to me through his will, what right does Colonel Whitmore have to claim it as military property? None, she said flatly. Not unless there's some documentation proving the military's interest in the property. A lien, a lease agreement, something. There's nothing. Just the fabricated documents I found in his desk. Diaz nodded slowly. Then legally, the property is yours. But this isn't just a legal issue, Major. This is about a senior officer potentially abusing his position. That's a different battle entirely. I'm prepared to fight it, I said, meeting her gaze. But I need to do it right. Start with documentation, she advised. Everything you have that proves ownership. The deed, the will, property tax records, utility bills in your father's name. Then you'll need to document Whitmore's claims and actions. Dates, times, witnesses, if possible. I nodded, already mentally cataloging the evidence I'd gathered and what I still needed. And Major, she added, her voice softer, be careful. Colonel Whitmore has a reputation for being vindictive toward those who cross him. I understand the risk. Good. She scribbled something on a notepad and handed it to me. This is my personal number. Call me if you need anything else. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my case methodically. During the day, I performed my duties with, precision, giving Whitmore no cause to question my loyalty or competence. At night, I gathered evidence, property records from the county clerk's office, bank statements showing my father's mortgage payments, testimonials from neighbors who had known Dad for years. Sergeant Collins proved invaluable, using his network of connections to monitor Whitmore's activities and gather intelligence. He confirmed what I'd suspected. Whitmore was planning to use the villa as leverage for promotion, presenting himself to senior leadership as innovative and resourceful for securing such a prime location for military use. He's scheduled a leadership retreat there next month, Collins told me as we jogged the perimeter track one morning. General Harrington will be there along with staff from Division Headquarters. It's supposed to be a big strategic planning session. I processed this information, seeing both the threat and the opportunity. That's when he plans to cement his lie. Yes, ma'am, but it's also when you could expose him, if you're ready. If I was ready. That was the question that kept me up at night. I had the evidence, but Whitmore had rank and influence. I needed someone with equal or greater authority in my corner. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a routine training exercise. I was observing my platoon's performance when a helicopter landed nearby, and General Harrington emerged, accompanied by his aide. The general was a legend at Fort Cavazos, a decorated combat veteran who had risen through the ranks through grit and intelligence rather than political connections. He had a reputation for fairness and for having zero tolerance for dishonesty. After reviewing the exercise, he approached me directly. Major Ramirez, he said, extending his hand. I've been meaning to speak with you since your father's passing. James was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with. Thank you, sir. I shook his hand, struck by the genuine warmth in his eyes. That means a great deal coming from you. I've been overseas, or I would have attended the funeral. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. Do you have a moment to talk privately? I'd like to share a few memories of your father. We walked to a quiet area away from the troops. For several minutes, the general reminisced about serving with my father in Desert Storm, about my dad's bravery under fire and his unwavering integrity. I listened, grateful for these new stories about the man who had raised me. He spoke of you often, the general said finally. He was immensely proud of you, Natalie, following in his footsteps but carving your own path. Something in his tone made me take a chance. Sir, my father left me his home at Canyon Lake. It meant a great deal to him. To us. The general's expression shifted subtly. Yes, I remember that place. Visited him there a few times after he retired. Beautiful spot. He built most of it himself, didn't he? Yes, sir. I hesitated, then pressed forward. Sir, there's a situation regarding the property that concerns me deeply. I've been trying to determine the appropriate way to address it. Harrington studied me for a long moment. Does this concern Colonel Whitmore's claim that the property belongs to the military? I couldn't hide my surprise. You know about that, sir? Whitmore has been quite vocal about his acquisition. The general's tone was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. He's invited half the senior staff to view what he's calling a strategic retreat facility. My heart raced. This was my opening. Sir, with all due respect, Colonel Whitmore's claims are false. I have documentation proving the property belongs to me, inherited legally from my father. There was never any military interest in the land. The general's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his gaze. Those are serious allegations, Major. Yes, sir. I wouldn't make them without substantial evidence. He was silent. For a moment, considering. Then, I'm holding office hours tomorrow from 0800 to 1000. Bring your evidence and we'll discuss this matter properly. Thank you, sir. As he turned to go, he added, And Major, until then, this conversation never happened. I spent that night organizing my documentation, preparing my presentation as meticulously as I would for a combat operation. This was my one chance to convince the general, and I couldn't afford any mistakes. The next morning, I arrived at his office at precisely 0800, a folder containing all my evidence tucked under my arm. His aide showed me in immediately. Major Ramirez, the general said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Let's see what you've brought me. For the next hour, I presented my case, the legitimate deed and will, the property tax records, the photographs of Whitmore using the property for personal entertainment, the fabricated documents I'd discovered. I spoke plainly, letting the evidence speak for itself rather than coloring it with emotional appeals. When I finished, General Harrington was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. Your father once saved my life in Iraq. He said finally. Did he ever tell you that story? No, sir. We were pinned down by enemy fire. I'd been hit in the leg, couldn't move. James carried me 2 miles to the extraction point, under constant threat. Never once considered leaving me behind. He picked up the photograph of the altered deed. He was the most honest man I ever knew. The idea that he would participate in some kind of property scheme is absurd on its face. Relief washed through me. He believed me. What do you want me to do, Major? He asked, his voice level. Think carefully before you answer. I straightened in my chair. I want the truth to be known, sir. I want my father's property returned to me, and I want Colonel Whitmore to be held accountable for his actions. The general nodded slowly. And how would you like this to be handled? I could address it privately with Colonel Whitmore, order him to stand down and return the property. I considered this option. It would resolve the situation with minimal fuss, minimal public embarrassment, but it would also allow Whitmore to save face, to potentially spin the situation as a simple misunderstanding. Sir, with respect, Colonel Whitmore publicly humiliated me. He lied to our entire unit, to you, to everyone at Fort Cavazos. He's using my father's home as a stepping stone for his career advancement. I met the general's gaze steadily. I believe the resolution should be equally public. A hint of a smile touched the general's lips. You have your father's spine, Major Ramirez. He leaned forward. Here's what we're going to do. The leadership retreat at Canyon Lake was scheduled for the following Saturday. For the next week, I maintained an outward appearance of calm professionalism, giving no indication that anything had changed. I attended briefings, led training exercises, and saluted Colonel Whitmore with the proper respect due his rank. Inside, though, I was a storm of anticipation and nervousness. General Harrington's plan was bold, perhaps bolder than I would have dared on my own, but it offered the chance for complete vindication. Are you sure about this? Sergeant Collins asked as we reviewed the final details in my quarters the night before the retreat. Once we set this in motion, there's no turning back. I looked down at the envelope on my desk. Official orders, signed by General Harrington himself, confirming my ownership of the Canyon Lake property and explicitly prohibiting its use for military purposes without my consent. I'm sure, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Whitmore needs to be exposed, not just to save my property, but because a man who would abuse his authority this way has no business leading soldiers. Collins nodded, his expression solemn. The troops respect you, ma'am, more than you know. Whatever happens tomorrow, you won't stand alone. His words touched me deeply. In the weeks since my father's death, I'd felt increasingly isolated, first by grief, then by Whitmore's machinations. It was a powerful reminder that integrity still mattered, that good people would stand with you when the cause was just. Thank you, David. I tucked the envelope into my uniform pocket. For everything. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect Texas spring day. I rose before sunrise, dressed with particular care in my Class A uniform, and drove to Canyon Lake. According to Collins, Whitmore had ordered the unit to assemble at the villa at 0900. General Harrington and the other senior officers would arrive at 0930 for the start of the retreat. I parked my car out of sight, down the road from the villa, and waited. At 8:45, vehicles began to arrive. First the advance team to set up equipment and refreshments, then groups of soldiers and officers. I watched through binoculars as they gathered on the front lawn, where a podium had been set up facing rows of chairs. At precisely 0900, Colonel Whitmore arrived, dressed immaculately in his service uniform, chest gleaming with ribbons and medals. He strode through the assembled troops like a king surveying his domain, stopping occasionally to speak to an officer or inspect a soldier's appearance. I checked my watch. It was time. I started my car and drove slowly up the road toward the villa. As I approached the gate, 2 MPs stepped forward, hands raised to stop me. "I'm sorry, ma'am," one said, recognizing me. "This is a restricted area today. Colonel's orders." I rolled down my window fully. "I have orders from General Harrington," I said, loud enough for nearby soldiers to hear. "I'm expected." The MPs exchanged uncertain glances. Before they could decide, a familiar voice called out, "Let her through!" Sergeant Collins appeared at the gate, his expression carefully neutral. The MPs stepped aside, and I drove through, parking near the house. As I emerged from my car, I was acutely aware of every eye turning in my direction, of the whispers spreading through the assembled troops. Colonel Whitmore was at the podium, reviewing his notes. When he looked up and saw me, his face darkened with anger. He strode toward me, intercepting me before I could reach the assembled soldiers. "Major Ramirez," he hissed, keeping his voice low. "What do you think you're doing? You were not invited to this event." I met his gaze calmly. "Actually, sir, I was. By General Harrington." Confusion flickered across his face, quickly replaced by suspicion. "The general made no mention of this to me. Perhaps you should ask him yourself, sir. He'll be arriving shortly." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "This is insubordination, Major. Return to base immediately. That's an order." I stood my ground. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. I have official orders that supersede that command." "What orders?" His voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby officers. "Regarding the ownership and use of this property, sir." I touched the envelope in my pocket. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding that needs to be clarified." Whitmore's face flushed with anger. "There is no misunderstanding. This is military property, and you are trespassing." "Sergeant," he called to a nearby NCO. "Escort Major Ramirez off the premises immediately." Before the sergeant could respond, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. All heads turned as General Harrington's chopper appeared over the tree line, descending toward the clearing beside the villa. "We'll sort this out now, sir," I said to Whitmore, whose complexion had gone from red to ashen. The general emerged from the helicopter, accompanied by his aide and 2 members of his staff. The assembled soldiers snapped to attention as he approached, rendering perfect salutes. "At ease," Harrington said, his voice carrying across the lawn. His eyes swept over the gathering, pausing briefly on me before settling on Colonel Whitmore. "Colonel, I see you've prepared quite an event." "Yes, sir," Whitmore replied, regaining his composure. "We're honored to have you join us at our new strategic retreat facility." The general nodded thoughtfully. "About that, I've been reviewing some paperwork regarding this property." He turned to me. "Major Ramirez, I believe you have something to share with us." This was it, the moment we had planned. I stepped forward, pulling the envelope from my pocket. "Sir," I said, addressing General Harrington but projecting my voice so everyone could hear, "I have here official orders confirming that this property at Canyon Lake belongs to me, inherited from my late father, Sergeant Major James Ramirez. These orders explicitly state that the property is private, not military, and cannot be used for official functions without my consent." A murmur swept through the assembled soldiers. Whitmore's face drained of all color. "That's impossible," he said, his voice strained. "I have documentation. Falsified documentation," the general cut in sharply. "Which you created and backdated?" "Colonel, we have evidence of that as well." The silence that fell over the gathering was absolute. Every soldier stood frozen, watching the drama unfold with a mixture of shock and fascination. Colonel Whitmore's face had gone from ashen to ghost white, his eyes darting between me, General Harrington, and the envelope in my hand. "General," Whitmore said finally, his voice unnaturally high, "there must be some misunderstanding. The paperwork I showed you clearly indicated—" "I've seen Major Ramirez's documentation, Colonel," the general interrupted, his tone crisp with authority. "The deed, the will, property tax records going back 15 years, all in her father's name, all properly transferred to her upon his death. There is no misunderstanding." Whitmore's jaw worked silently for a moment. I could almost see his mind racing, searching for an escape route. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a complex legal matter that shouldn't interfere with today's important strategic planning session. Perhaps we could table this discussion and proceed with—" "This is not up for debate, Colonel." General Harrington's voice had dropped to a dangerous quiet. "Major Ramirez, would you please, read the orders for everyone's benefit?" I unfolded the document, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "By order of General Douglas Harrington, Commanding General, Fort Cavazos, Texas," I read clearly. "It is hereby recognized that the property located at 1482 Lakeside Drive, Canyon Lake, Texas, rightfully belongs to Major Natalie Ramirez, inherited from her father, Sergeant Major James Ramirez, deceased. Any claims that this property is military land or under military jurisdiction are false and without merit." I paused, glancing up to see the reactions rippling through the crowd. Soldiers exchanging looks, officers whispering to each other, Sergeant Collins standing at attention with the barest hint of a smile on his lips. "Furthermore," I continued, "it is ordered that all military personnel and equipment be removed from said property immediately, and that Colonel Stephen Whitmore provide a full accounting of his actions regarding this property, including explanation of falsified documents found in his possession. Signed, General Douglas Harrington." As I finished reading, Whitmore made a desperate final attempt. "General, this is clearly a personal vendetta. Major Ramirez is upset about her father's passing and confused about the property's status. If you'll review the documents I provided—" "I have reviewed them, Colonel," the general cut in coldly. "I've also had them examined by experts. The land grant you claimed existed, never issued. The military housing program you referenced doesn't exist. The backdated memo supposedly authorizing the transfer? A forgery." With each statement, Whitmore seemed to physically shrink, his shoulders hunching, his chest caving inward as if he'd been struck. "But what's most disturbing, Colonel," the general continued, his voice pitched to carry to every person present, "is not just the fraud itself, but the reason behind it. This wasn't about securing a valuable asset for the military. This was about personal gain, using a subordinate's private property to enhance your prestige, to entertain guests, to position yourself for promotion." A low murmur swept through the assembled soldiers. I could see the realization dawning on their faces as pieces clicked into place. The sudden appearance of this retreat facility, the speed with which Whitmore had claimed it, his insistence that no one question its provenance. "General, I can explain," Whitmore began, desperation edging his voice. "Save it for the formal inquiry, Colonel." The general turned to his aide. "Major Reed, effective immediately. Colonel Whitmore is relieved of command pending investigation. Please escort him back to Fort Cavazos and ensure he has no further access to this property." "Yes, sir." Major Reed stepped forward, his expression professionally blank. "Colonel, if you'll come with me." For a moment I thought Whitmore might refuse, might continue to protest, to fight for the lie he'd constructed so carefully. Instead, something in him seemed to collapse. His shoulders slumped, and without meeting anyone's eyes, he turned and followed Major Reed toward the waiting helicopter. As they walked away, General Harrington addressed the assembled soldiers. "I apologize for the disruption to today's scheduled activities. The leadership retreat is obviously canceled. All personnel are to return to Fort Cavazos immediately." The soldiers began to disperse, moving with the organized efficiency of trained military personnel despite the extraordinary circumstances. Many glanced my way as they passed, some with curiosity, others with newfound respect. A few senior officers approached General Harrington, asking quiet questions that I couldn't hear. I stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the swiftness with which everything had changed. After weeks of anxiety and careful planning, it was over. Whitmore was exposed. My father's home was safe. Justice had been served, not through violence, or even raised voices, but through the simple, powerful force of truth. Sergeant Collins appeared at my side. "You did it, ma'am," he said quietly. "We did it," I corrected him. "I couldn't have gathered all that evidence without your help," he smiled, nodding toward the general, who was now walking toward us. "Heads up, the boss is incoming." General Harrington dismissed the remaining officers with a gesture and stopped in front of me. For a moment, he simply studied my face, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he extended his hand. "Your father would be proud, Major," he said as we shook hands. "You handled this with the same integrity and perseverance he always showed." "Thank you, sir." My voice caught slightly on the words. "This isn't over, you understand?" He continued, his tone more serious. "There will be an official investigation. You'll need to provide statements, submit your evidence formally." "I'm prepared for that, sir." He nodded. I expected no less. He glanced around at the villa, taking in the sweeping porch, the view of the lake beyond. "It's a beautiful place. James showed it to me once, not long after he built it. He talked about how you'd fish together off that dock." The mention of those memories, so precious to me, so unexpectedly shared, brought a lump to my throat. "Yes, sir. Some of my best memories are here." The general seemed to understand what I couldn't quite express. "Take some time, Major. Get your house back in order. Report to my office on Monday at 0900 and we'll begin the formal procedures." "Yes, sir. Thanks, you." He nodded once more, then turned and walked toward his waiting helicopter, leaving me standing on the lawn of my father's villa, my villa, surrounded by the gentle spring breeze and the distant sound of departing vehicles. As the last of the military personnel left, an unexpected quiet settled over the property. I walked slowly toward the house, up the steps of the porch where I'd stood weeks earlier while Whitmore ordered me away. The key felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the door. Inside, much had changed. The furniture Whitmore had brought in, sleek, impersonal, chosen for impression rather than comfort, still filled the rooms. My father's things were still missing. But the space itself, the bones of the house, remained unchanged. The afternoon sunlight still slanted through the windows at the same angle, illuminating dust motes and golden shafts. The wood floors still creaked in the same spots. The view of the lake through the back windows was exactly as I remembered. I moved through the rooms slowly, taking inventory of what had been changed, what needed to be restored. In the study, the ornate desk Whitmore had installed loomed incongruously against the simple paneled walls. I opened its drawers, finding them mostly empty now, the falsified documents removed, either by Whitmore himself or by the general's staff. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. "Collins," came the response after a single ring. "It's Ramirez," I said. "I know this is asking a lot, but do you remember where my father stored his extra furniture? The pieces that were too good to throw away, but that he'd replaced?" "The storage unit in New Braunfels," he answered without hesitation. "I helped him move some things there about 3 years ago. You need help getting it back?" A smile tugged at my lips. "If you're free tomorrow, I'd like to get this place back to the way it was." "I'll be there at 800, he said without hesitation. "And ma'am, I might know a few other folks who'd be willing to help. People who respected your father. People who want to make this right." The offer touched me deeply. "I'd appreciate that, David. Thank you." After we hung up, I continued my tour of the house. In what had been my father's bedroom, now stripped of his personal items, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. The loss, the betrayal, the fight, and finally, the vindication. My father had taught me that respect wasn't about rank or power, but about integrity and truth. That lesson had guided me through the darkest moments of this ordeal, had given me the strength to stand up against a superior officer when I knew he was wrong. As the sunset painted the lake in shades of gold and crimson, I walked out to the dock where Dad and I had spent countless hours fishing, talking, simply being together. I sat at the edge, feet dangling above the water, and for the first time since his death, I felt his presence not as an absence, but as something that surrounded me. "We did it, Dad," I whispered to the fading light. "We protected what you built." And somewhere in the gentle lapping of waves, against the dock, in the rustle of wind through the trees behind the house, I could almost hear his answer. Sunday morning arrived with the promise of renewal. I woke early, made coffee in the kitchen that still felt more like Whitmore's than mine, and stepped onto the porch to watch the sunrise over Canyon Lake. The air was cool, the sky painted in delicate strokes of pink and gold, as if nature itself was celebrating a return to rightful order. At precisely 0800, a caravan of vehicles appeared at the gate, Sergeant Collins in his truck, followed by 3 more cars filled with familiar faces. I recognized Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from logistics, Specialist Chen from communications, Lieutenant Parker from training, all people who had served with my father or with me, all volunteers come to help reclaim this space. "Hope you don't mind the extra hands, ma'am," Collins said as they gathered on the lawn. Word got around about what happened, and, well, people wanted to help. I looked at the assembled group. 8 soldiers, all in civilian clothes, all standing at a respectful parade rest despite being off duty. The sight brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I'm grateful to all of, you," I said, meaning it from the depths of my soul. "This means more than you know." We organized quickly, with military efficiency. Collins had already retrieved the keys to my father's storage unit, and we divided into teams. Some to go retrieve the original furniture, others to pack up Whitmore's additions for return to base, others to begin cleaning and restoring the house itself. As we worked, stories flowed, memories of my father shared by soldiers who had served under him, tales of his legendary patience with new recruits, his unfailing integrity, his dry humor that emerged at unexpected moments. "Your dad talked me through my first deployment," Rodriguez told me, as we carefully wrapped Whitmore's pretentious artwork for removal. "I was scared shitless. Sorry, ma'am." And he just sat with me the night before we shipped out. Didn't give me any bull about not being afraid. Just told me that courage isn't about not feeling fear, it's about doing what needs doing anyway. "Sounds like him," I said, smiling at the memory it conjured. My father saying something similar to me before my first day at the academy. By midday, Whitmore's presence had been systematically erased from the villa. His furniture was loaded onto Collins' truck for return to Fort Cavazos. The walls had been scrubbed of the hooks and nails he'd used to hang his art. Even the expensive liquor he'd stocked in the cabinet had been boxed up, ready to be removed. When the truck returned from the storage facility with my father's furniture, his worn leather armchair, his simple oak desk, his dining table, scarred with years of family meals, the transformation truly began. Each piece that found its way back to its rightful place seemed to breathe life back into the house. The villa was shedding its cold, sterile appearance and returning to the warm, lived-in home it had always been. "Found these in the storage unit too," Lieutenant Parker said, handing me a cardboard box carefully packed with photo frames. "Thought you might want them back up." I opened the box to find the photographs that had once lined the hallway and study walls. Images of my father and me throughout the years, of his military service, of the family and friends who had filled his life. Among them was the picture of him and General Harrington in desert fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders, that I'd found in his study the day after his funeral. "These belong here," I said, running my fingers over the frame. They always did. By late afternoon, the transformation was complete. The villa looked as it had when my father was alive. Perhaps a bit cleaner, a bit more organized, but fundamentally the same. His books lined the shelves again. His fishing gear hung by the door. His photographs watched over the rooms from their accustomed places. As the light began to fade, I called everyone onto the porch and uncapped a cooler of beer I'd brought from town that morning. "I can't thank you all enough," I said, passing out bottles. "What you've done today, it's not just about furniture or photos. You've helped restore my father's legacy. You've helped make this place a home again." We toasted to my father, to justice served, to the bonds that connected us beyond rank and duty. As they finished their beers, the soldiers began to depart in ones and twos, each leaving with a handshake or, in some cases, a brief, fierce hug. Collins was the last to go, lingering on the porch as twilight settled over the lake. "You good here, ma'am? I can stay if you need help with anything else." I shook my head, smiling. "I'm good, David. Better than I've been in a long time." He nodded, understanding more than I'd said. "Your dad was one of the best men I ever served with. When all this went down with Whitmore, a lot of us felt like we'd failed him somehow. Not standing up sooner, not seeing what was happening." He looked out at the darkening water. "Today felt like making that right. At least, little bit." "You never failed him," I said firmly. "And you certainly never failed me. I couldn't have done any of this without you." After Collins left, I sat alone on the porch, watching night fall over Canyon Lake. The house behind me was quiet, but it was a different quality of quiet than before. Not the emptiness of absence, but the fullness of presence. My father's presence, my presence, the presence of memory and legacy and love that could never be stolen, no matter what material things might be taken. I slept that night in my father's bedroom, now restored with his familiar furniture. The solid oak bed frame he'd built himself, the worn quilt my grandmother had made, the bedside lamp with its base carved from driftwood found on the lake shore. For the first time since his death, I slept soundly, without dreams, wrapped in the comfort of being exactly where I belonged. Monday morning arrived too soon. I rose at dawn, dressed in my Class A uniform with particular care, and drove to Fort Cavazos for my 0900 meeting with General Harrington. The base felt different somehow, or perhaps I was the one who had changed. Soldiers saluted as I passed, some with a new recognition in their eyes. Word had spread quickly about what had happened at the villa, about Colonel Whitmore's deception and downfall. The general's aide showed me into his office precisely at 0900. General Harrington was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out at the parade ground below. He turned as I entered, his expression serious but not unkind. "Major Ramirez," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat." I sat at attention, back straight, hands resting on my knees. "Thank you for seeing me, sir." "How's the villa?" he asked, surprising me with the personal question before business. "Restored, sir. A group of volunteers helped me move everything back yesterday. It looks like it did when my father was alive." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. Good. James deserves that much, at least. He settled into his chair, folding his hands on the desk. "Now, to the matter at hand. The investigation into Colonel Whitmore's actions is underway. The evidence you provided has been entered into the official record. And what happens now, sir? Whitmore has been relieved of command, as you know. He's currently confined to quarters while the investigation proceeds." The general's expression hardened slightly. "He's trying to characterize this as a simple misunderstanding, claiming he genuinely believed the property had military connections due to your father's service record." "That's a lie, sir," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. The documents in his desk were clearly falsified. He knew exactly what he was doing. "Yes, he did." Harrington's tone was grim. "And the evidence supports that conclusion. The forensic analysis of those documents shows they were created recently, despite being backdated. There's also the testimony of several officers who confirm that Whitmore explicitly claimed to have negotiated the property's acquisition himself." I nodded, relieved that the truth was continuing to emerge, that Whitmore wouldn't be able to twist his way out of consequences through clever wordplay or rank privilege. "I won't lie to you, Major," the general continued. "This process will take time. There will be hearings, testimonies, reviews of evidence. Whitmore has connections, people who owe him favors. He won't go down without a fight." "I understand, sir. I'm prepared for whatever comes." "Next." He studied me for a moment, then opened a drawer and withdrew a folder. "Which brings me to my next point. Your current assignment under Whitmore's former command is obviously untenable. I've been reviewing your service record, exemplary, by the way, and considering alternatives." He slid the folder across the desk. I opened it to find transfer orders, reassignment to division headquarters as operations officer, reporting directly to General Harrington himself. It was a significant promotion in responsibility, a vote of confidence that took my breath away. "Sir, you've demonstrated not just integrity, Major, but strategic thinking, perseverance, and leadership. These are qualities I value in my command staff." His voice softened slightly. "And if I'm being completely honest, I owe your father a debt I can never fully repay. Having his daughter on my staff feels like honoring that debt, at least in some small way." 6 weeks passed in a blur of new responsibilities and adjustments. My position at division headquarters demanded long hours and intense focus, but the work was meaningful, challenging in the best way. General Harrington proved to be a demanding but fair commander, pushing me to expand my capabilities while providing the guidance I needed to succeed. Through it all, the investigation into Colonel Whitmore's actions continued. I gave my testimony before a formal military panel, presenting the evidence I had gathered with the same calm professionalism I brought to my new duties. Other witnesses came forward as well. Officers who had heard Whitmore's false claims about acquiring the property, soldiers who had been ordered to help move his personal items into the villa, even a civilian contractor who had been paid to create the falsified documents. On a warm Tuesday in July, General Harrington called me into his office. I found him standing at the window as usual, his posture rigid even in moments of apparent relaxation. "The panel has reached its conclusions, Major," he said without preamble as I closed the door behind me. "Colonel Whitmore has been found guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer, misuse of authority, falsification of official documents, and attempted appropriation of private property. I absorbed this information, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and weariness. What happens to him now, sir? He'll be dishonorably discharged, forfeit all retirement benefits, and potentially face civilian charges for the document fraud. The general turned to face me fully. It's over, Major. He's finished. Relief washed through me, but it was tempered with a strange sadness. Not for Whitmore. He had earned his fate with his actions, but for the waste of it all. A decorated officer with decades of service, ending. His career in disgrace because of greed and arrogance. Permission to speak freely, sir? The general nodded. I never wanted his destruction, I said quietly. I just wanted my father's home back. I wanted the truth to be known. I understand that, Harrington replied, his voice softening. But in the military, as in life, our choices have consequences. Whitmore made his choice when he decided to steal from the daughter of a respected veteran, when he falsified documents, when he abused his authority for personal gain. He paused, studying my expression. You've shown more grace in this situation than many would have. Thank you, sir. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and I sat. There's something else we need to discuss. The panel recommended a formal apology be issued. To you, along with recognition of your father's service. They've suggested a small ceremony at Fort Cavazos next week. I hadn't expected this. Hadn't considered that there might be public acknowledgement beyond Whitmore's removal. A ceremony, sir? Nothing elaborate. A formal statement acknowledging the wrong done to you and your family. Recognition of your father's 30 years of honorable service. Perhaps the presentation of a plaque for the villa. He watched me carefully. Unless you'd prefer to put this all behind you without further public attention. I considered the offer, thinking of my father, of what he would want. I think he would appreciate the recognition, sir. Not for himself, but as a statement about the values he believed in. Integrity. Honor. Truth. The general nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. I thought you might say that. I'll have my aide coordinate the details with you. As I stood to leave, he added, One more thing, Major. How are you settling into your new role here? Very well, sir. The work is challenging, but I'm learning every day. Good, because I've been considering a more permanent arrangement. Your temporary assignment ends in 2 weeks, but I'd like to offer you a fixed position on my staff. Your performance has been exemplary, and frankly, we need more officers with your particular combination of strategic thinking and moral backbone. The offer took me by surprise. A permanent position on the general staff was a significant career advancement, the kind of opportunity that could set me on a path to higher command. I'm honored, sir. I'd be proud to accept. Excellent. We'll make it official after the ceremony next week. He extended his hand, and we shook firmly. Your father would be proud, Natalie, not just of how you handled this situation, but of the officer you've become. The ceremony took place the following Thursday on the parade ground at Fort Cavazos. It was a clear, hot Texas day, the kind where the air shimmers with heat, and even the birds seek shade rather than song. I stood at attention in my dress uniform, perspiration gathering at the back of my neck as General Harrington addressed the assembled troops. We gather today to right a wrong, he began, his voice carrying across the silent ranks, to acknowledge that even within an institution built on honor and integrity, failures can occur. To recognize that when such failures are exposed, they must be addressed openly and honestly. He spoke of my father's service, 30 years of dedication to country and corps, and of the legacy he had left behind, both in the soldiers he had trained and mentored and in the home he had built with his own hands. That legacy was temporarily tarnished by the actions of an officer who failed to uphold the standards we all swear to maintain, the general continued, never mentioning Whitmore by name but making the reference unmistakable. Today we formally apologize to Major Natalie Ramirez for that failure, and we commend her for the dignity and honor with which she pursued justice. As he spoke, I saw faces in the crowd. Sergeant Collins standing tall and proud, the soldiers who had helped restore my father's villa, officers who had served alongside my dad years earlier. Their presence meant more than any formal recognition ever could. After the general's speech, I was called forward to receive a plaque honoring my father's service. It was a simple thing, polished wood and engraved brass, but the words it bore captured the essence of the man. Sergeant Major James Ramirez, 1955-2023. He served with honor, led with integrity, and taught by example. We'd like this displayed at the villa, General Harrington said as he presented it to me. A reminder to all who visit of the man who built it and the principles he stood for. Thank you, sir. I managed, my voice steady despite the emotion tightening my throat. It will have a place of honor. The ceremony concluded with a formal salute. Hundreds of soldiers rendering honors not to me, but to the memory of my father and the values he had embodied. As the troops dispersed, people approached to shake my hand, to share a memory of my father, to express their support. Sergeant Collins was among the last to reach me. He would have hated all this fuss, he said with a knowing smile, but he would have appreciated the gesture. I laughed softly, imagining my father's embarrassed discomfort at being the center of such attention. You're right. He would have been eager to escape to his dock with a fishing rod and a cold beer. Speaking of which, Collins said, a few of us were thinking of heading out to the villa this weekend. Maybe do some fishing, have a barbecue. Sort of a proper housewarming now that everything's settled. If you're interested. The invitation touched me deeply. I'd like that, David. I'd like that a lot. That weekend, the villa came alive with voices and laughter for the first time since my father's death. Collins and a handful of other soldiers, friends, really, beyond the bonds of rank and duty, gathered on the dock, casting lines into the sun-dappled water of Canyon Lake. The smell of grilling burgers filled the air, mingling with the scent of pine and fresh water. As twilight approached, we moved to the porch, cold beers in hand, sharing stories that meandered from military adventures to childhood memories to future hopes. The plaque honoring my father held a place of prominence on the wall beside the front door, catching the golden light of the setting sun. In that moment, surrounded by people who had stood by me during the darkest days, I felt my father's presence more strongly than ever. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living legacy, in the home he had built, in the values he had instilled, in the community he had fostered through his lifetime of service. The villa was no longer just a place of loss and painful memories. It had become something new, a gathering, a place for friends, a repository for stories, a living testament to a life well lived. My father's gift to me had transformed, becoming not just the physical structure, but everything it represented: home, community, belonging. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I raised my bottle in a quiet toast. To my father, I said, my voice carrying across the porch, and to all of you who helped protect his legacy. Thank you. The bottles clinked together, and in that simple sound, I heard the echo of a promise fulfilled. 1 year later, autumn had painted Canyon Lake in fiery hues of red and gold. The trees surrounding the villa blazed with color, their reflections shimmering on the water's surface. I sat on the dock, a steaming mug of coffee warming my hands against the morning chill, watching the sun climb above the eastern shore. So much had changed in a year. My position on General Harrington's staff had become a springboard for advancement. I'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel 6 months earlier, taking on increased responsibilities that challenged and fulfilled me. The promotion had come with congratulations from throughout the command, a testament to the respect I'd earned not through inheritance or connection, but through demonstrated ability and integrity. Colonel Whitmore had faded from military life, his disgrace complete. I heard occasional rumors that he was working as a security consultant in Houston, that he had moved to Florida to escape his past, that he was writing a memoir trying to vindicate himself. None of it mattered to me anymore. The anger and hurt that had once burned so fiercely had cooled, replaced by a calm certainty that justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through truth. The villa had evolved as well. What had once been solely my father's home, then briefly a site of betrayal and conflict, had become something new, a place of gathering and community. The porch had hosted countless weekend barbecues, the dock had supported fishing lessons for colleagues' children. The spare bedrooms had sheltered friends needing a quiet retreat from the stresses of military life. Most significantly, I'd established a small foundation in my father's name, providing support for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Once a month, the villa hosted workshops where retiring soldiers could learn about benefits, job opportunities, and the emotional challenges of leaving military service. My father would have loved seeing his home used this way, continuing his lifetime of mentorship and support for those who served. The sound of tires on gravel pulled me from my reflections. I turned to see General Harrington's car coming up the driveway, right on schedule. He had called the previous evening, asking to meet privately away from the formality of headquarters. Such a request was unusual enough to pique my curiosity, though not concerning enough to cause worry. I met him at the front door, noting the civilian clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt, that signaled this was not an official visit. "General," I greeted him, extending my hand. Coffee's fresh if you'd like some. I would. Thank you. He followed me into the kitchen, his eyes taking in the changes I'd made to the space. New cabinets, a fresh coat of paint, my mother's old recipe box now proudly displayed on the counter. The place looks good, he commented as I handed him a mug. You've made it your own while keeping its spirit. That's what I've aimed for, I agreed, leading him out to the porch where two Adirondack chairs faced the lake. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our coffee, watching an osprey circle over the water in search of breakfast. Finally, the general spoke. I have news, Natalie. I wanted you to hear it from me directly, before the official announcement next week. I turned to him, noting the unusual use of my first name. Sir, I'm retiring, he said simply. 35 years is enough. It's time for new leadership, new energy. The news shouldn't have surprised me. The general was past the age when many officers stepped down, but somehow it did. He had seemed a permanent fixture at Fort Cavazos, as immovable as the hills themselves. The Army will miss your leadership, sir, I said sincerely. He smiled slightly. Perhaps. But institutions survive individuals as they should. New leaders step up, carrying forward what works, changing what doesn't. He turned to face me directly, which brings me to the second reason for my visit. I waited, curious. Before I leave, I've been asked to recommend my replacement for certain key positions. For the command of the 3rd Brigade Combat Team, I've put forward your name. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Brigade. Command was a significant step up from my current position. Thousands of soldiers under my authority, a level of responsibility I had hoped for but not expected so soon. That's a considerable vote of confidence, sir. You've earned it, he said matter-of-factly. Your performance this past year has been exceptional. You have the strategic mind, the leadership skills, and most importantly, the moral compass the position requires. He sipped his coffee before continuing. The final decision isn't mine, of course. There will be a review board, interviews, the usual bureaucracy. But my recommendation carries weight, and your record speaks for itself. Thank you, sir, I said, the words inadequate for the opportunity he was offering, for the faith he was showing in me. There's one more thing. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn photograph, the same one I had found in my father's study of him and a much younger Harrington in desert fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders. I'd like you to have this. I accepted it carefully, confused. But sir, this is yours. I have another copy, he said, waving away my protest. Your father saved my life in Iraq, as I told you once before. But what I didn't tell you was that it wasn't just physically. After that tour, I was in a dark place, drinking too much, pushing away family, considering leaving the service. James saw it happening and refused to let me spiral. He showed up at my quarters one night with a bottle of whiskey and sat with me until dawn, letting me talk through the things I couldn't say to anyone else. The general gazed out at the lake, seeing something beyond the present moment. When I finished talking, he didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just said, "Now you've got a choice, Doug. Let it break you, or let it forge you into something stronger." Then he took me fishing. A smile touched his lips at the memory. Right here, off this dock. We didn't talk about war or trauma or any of it, just fished. And somehow, by the end of that day, I could breathe again. I listened, deeply moved by this glimpse into a side of my father I hadn't known, his capacity to heal as well as lead, to understand the invisible wounds that soldiers often carried. He never mentioned it, I said softly. He wouldn't have. That wasn't his way. Harrington turned back to me. When this situation with Whitmore happened, I saw James in you. The same quiet integrity, the same determination to do what's right regardless of personal cost. It reminded me of the debt I owe him, a debt I can never fully repay, but can honor by ensuring his daughter has every opportunity to continue his legacy of principled leadership. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between us. Finally, I said, "I'll do my best to live up to that legacy, sir." "I know you will." He drained his coffee cup and stood. "The official paperwork will come through channels next week. You'll have time to prepare for the transition." I walked him to his car, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. As he opened the driver's door, he paused, looking back at the villa with its wraparound porch and view of the glittering lake. "He built something special here," the general said. "Not just a house, but a home, a place of integrity and welcome, I'm glad to see you continuing that tradition. Thank you for helping me protect it, I replied. After the general's car disappeared down the winding road, I returned to the dock, the photograph still in my hand. I studied the two young soldiers in desert fatigues, their faces streaked with dirt, their eyes alight with the particular bond that forms in challenging circumstances. My father had never told me about saving the general's life, either physically or emotionally. He had simply done what he believed was right, without expectation of recognition or reward. That, I realized, was the true legacy he had left me. Not just the villa with its pine walls and lake views, but an example of how to live with honor and purpose. How to stand for truth when it would be easier to remain silent. How to lead not through intimidation or rank, but through integrity and compassion. The brigade command, if it came through, would be a profound responsibility. Thousands of lives under my care, decisions that could shape careers and even nations. Victoires. Thought was daunting, but not overwhelming. My father had prepared me for this, not through direct instruction, but through the example of his life. As the sun climbed higher, painting the lake in diamonds of light, I made a quiet promise. To the memory of my father, to myself, to the soldiers I would soon lead. I would carry forward the values that had guided him. Honesty in all things. Courage in adversity. Compassion in strength. I would build on the foundation he had laid, extending his legacy through my own service. The villa stood behind me, solid and welcoming as it had been since the day my father completed it. It had weathered storms both literal and figurative, Whitmore's attempted theft, the grief of my father's passing, the seasons of change that reshape all lives. Yet it remained, not just intact, but stronger for having been defended, more precious for having been nearly lost. In that moment, I understood something my father had tried to teach me years earlier, during my first difficult command assignment. True strength, he had said, isn't about never being challenged. It's about standing firm when the challenge comes, about knowing what matters enough to fight. 4. The villa mattered. The truth mattered. The principles of honor and integrity that my father had lived by, these mattered most of all. And in standing firm for these things, I had not only protected my inheritance, but had grown into the leader my father had always believed I could be. As I walked back to the house, the photo of my father and General Harrington carefully tucked in my pocket, I felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. The painful chapter marked by loss and betrayal had ended. A new chapter, one of increased responsibility and opportunity to serve, was about to start. And through it all, the villa would remain, a constant reminder of where I had come from, of the values that had shaped me, of the legacy I carried forward. Not just a house of wood and stone, but a home built on honor, defended with dignity, and now filled with the promise of a future my father would have been proud to see.